he gets on here soon. So it's great to have everybody on the call here today. I'm really excited that we're going to get to hear from our group of panelists as they share their thoughts on being a senior IT executive in 2020, and specifically talk about what lessons they've learned since March and how it will shape their organizations as we move forward into this new world. The format will be 1 hour questions that I'll be asking to our panelists, followed by a 30-minute Q&A session. You all can submit questions for the Q&A at any time throughout the program by sending them to the panelist questions area in the Q&A box on your screen. I believe it's on the right-hand side of your screen, so please go ahead and submit your questions at any point. So let's go ahead and meet our panelists now. First, I'd like to give a warm welcome to Duane Barnes. Duane is the COO at RapidScale, a Cox business company. After a little bit, I'll give you a little bit about each of our panelists here today. After joining RapidScale in 2016, Duane was charged with the national engineering practice and was quickly promoted to CTO and then COO this year. He's currently responsible for service delivery, support, solutions engineering, software engineering, project and product management, compliance, and architecture, and I think that probably hits the laundry list of things, right, Duane? At RapidScale. Maybe he turns off the lights at the end of the day, too. So welcome, Duane. Next up, we have Mike Schmidt, who, Mike, I'm not sure if you're there just yet, but Mike is the CIO of Audit and Assurance at Deloitte & Touche. Mike oversees the overall technology direction of the audit and assurance businesses at Deloitte, and he provides leadership for the technology development and deployment, practice support, and audit and assurance products. Welcome, Mike. Next, we have Ranjan Singh. Ranjan is the Executive Vice President of Product and Technology at Crestron. He joined Crestron in July of 2019 and is responsible for their global product portfolio, setting the product vision and strategy, and driving product development for the company. Welcome, Ranjan.
Thank you.
Finally, we have our very own Steve Weston, who's the global CIO for us here at Hayes. Steve joined us in 2008 as our CIO, and he's currently responsible for all IT systems, security, strategy, and innovation across the 33-country worldwide Hayes network. So welcome, Steve, and thank you all for joining us today for this important discussion. I'll start each question by asking one of you directly, but I'd ask and even encourage each of you to please chime in and share your thoughts and opinions on each topic. I know there will be a lot of similarities in your responses, but there will certainly be some unique things to your business or your thought process that I know everybody would enjoy hearing, so please feel free to jump in on any question. So on that note, let's go ahead and get it started here. And maybe, Duane, I'll start with you first, if that's all right. And I'd love to hear your thoughts based on what you've learned in 2020 so far, where you'll be making the biggest technology investments in 2021.
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, some things have changed here this year, right? So, for us, we had quite the focus on real estate in 18 and 19. And anyone that knows a little bit about RapidScale, we've grown exponentially by headcount, right? So we were always concerned about having that workstation and that area for folks to come in and work. I think we got the call in early March to send everyone home, and maybe it's for a month, maybe it's 2 months, and now we're thinking it's going to be over a year from home. So a lot of our focus has shifted on unified communications, for example. So instead of having that traditional, phone on the desk or headset, right, we have shifted completely to a virtual Teams environment, and haven't really looked back. And as we do formulate a plan to get back into the office, I suspect that people aren't going to want to go back to those traditional, handsets on the desk. They're just going to be a year and a half of using Teams and things like that. So the spend from that perspective, has shifted. And then, from there, I think we're spending a lot of time thinking about, well, how can we beyond just, virtual communications, how do we collaborate with our teams in globally in events and other strategies where, maybe we're used to flying to Vegas, for example, for an event, and instead of doing that, leveraging smart boards in our conference rooms and getting smaller groups of people together, but collaborating and using technology.
So maybe you guys can hear me okay, right?
Yes, Mike. Yeah.
Great. Sorry, little technical difficulties, which tells me our cyber guys are doing their homework. So, just like, as far as, Duane, similar type of setup here at Deloitte, I think that our investments, mobility, cloud, collaboration, those are the big ones right now, as far as making sure that our practitioners are as productive as possible. I think one of the things, same time frame in March, that we had a great experience working from the office or our client locations. But what do you do when you actually shift 100% of your workforce to work from home? So that became our trick right there, is to go out there. People had worked from home. We prepared for that, but we certainly never envisioned a scenario where we had 100% of our clients, 100% of our staff working from home. And so we spent a lot of time improving that virtual home experience, making sure that we had VDI capabilities so that folks worked in our delivery centers were able to connect. So the whole thing was seamless collaboration. How do you do that? We were piloting Zoom at the time. So we went out there and accelerated Zoom to all of our practitioners over the weekend. Teams was out there. So pretty much between Teams and Zoom, we're able to collaborate. And then while doing that, there's a number of cyber related activities we had to do to secure the endpoints, make sure that the bad actors were at base. We spent a lot of time with both Microsoft and Zoom beefing up the security. So a ton of investment on that side of the house just to virtualize our workforce. And then the automation, a lot of investment right now in automation of our tech controls to make sure we have the monitoring, logging and everything in place so that we can detect things, not to actually respond in a regression way, but actually being predictive in terms of where the potential challenges are. So very similar to what Duane had to say.
Here at Crestron, I'm sure the story can be repeated across many companies. Some positive things that we had in place, given the business Crestron is in room automation and technology for rooms and buildings. We were heavily invested in Office 365 and Teams already. So that is what we do for the industry, for the Pro AV industry. So from that standpoint, we had made all those technology investments, and we were, I would say, fortunate enough, especially with the move to Office 365, because Crestron, as a business, a global business, is work from the office type of business, with very few remote environments outside of sales offices. Everybody else, engineering, operations, manufacturing, supply chain, all of it's in the office type of environment. So it was quite remarkable for us to be able to, as Mike and Duane pointed out, to be able to literally overnight start be able to work remotely. And it's a credit to our CIO to have made some investments and made some planning in advance with that regard. Now, there are still remain functions that are very, very hard to do remotely, right? So we have logistics and all of that. You have to ship products. So for that, we had to figure out a way to how to continue to operate and enable a small select group of people to still be able to work from the office, if you like, or the warehouse. So that was the first challenge we have to take on, in this pandemic. How do we make them feel safe? What are the actions and processes we can put in place, be compliant with the local laws and such? So that was one element. From a technology standpoint, as we look forward, there's a number of things to think about. And I speak to it from two dimensions. The first is the company itself, right? What investments do we have to make? Mike pointed out that everybody is used to working from outside the office now. Effectively, the term is work from anywhere. And we all are on a call today, and you effectively have a democratized experience. Everybody is an equal participant. Now, when we get back to the office or working from the buildings, whether it's 2 days a week or 3 days a week, it will be a mixed environment. And we have to ensure that technology enables that collaboration in that mixed environment, as opposed to be all in or all remote. So that's one dimension we are thinking about. Obviously, we are in that business and we have to enable it. So we work with Teams and Zoom as to how to bring that collaborative experience. What's the technology we can deliver in the home and in the office to enable that, right? Beyond the headset, having a desk phone, proper equipment, those kinds of things. The second dimension to the problem is really what is the plan and the process to bring people back? And for that, we did a study amongst our client base to try and understand how people were thinking about it. So the first is you have to get people into the door, right? So you have to find a way to get people into the door, the minimum investment in technology, maybe somebody taking a temperature, etc. But those are the very things you can then start to evolve to with automated temperature checks, with facial recognition, with automatic badge login. So those are some of the other areas. And then the third dimension really is a learning from how we were able to overnight work remotely. We were able to do that because we leveraged more cloud and IT services as opposed to on-premise services. So our CIO is looking at more technology investments while ensuring all of the security things that Mike talked about. And Mike, thank you for driving Teams and Zoom that I'm sure the whole customer base benefited from your efforts. So those are some of the dimensions that Crestron is thinking of in terms of technology investments.
So Dave, from our perspective, and not trying to repeat what's already been said, from us, the starting point was obviously to make everybody work from home, right? That's everybody's starting point. Without the investment that we'd made in the 365 prior to this, we'd have never achieved it. However, if you kind of look forward, then we're probably making the largest investment we've ever made, right, since 2008, into building a completely cloud-based world. So moving out of on-premise on the basis that we will no longer have a workforce, and our workforce is around 11,000 people worldwide in 33 countries, that will work from home every day of the week. I think that day has passed. I think we've proven that you can work in a what I'd call a hybrid situation, in a kind of different hybrid situation. And once you start working in hybrid situation, you have to then build all of your systems and all of your processes to operate in that exact way. They have to be enabled to work in that way. So one interesting stat that I don't know whether everybody else looked at this, be interested to know. When we went out in March, by the time we got to beginning of April, 80% of our traffic was intra-Microsoft, right? So we all of a sudden became an organization that probably had a bit of reliance on, could Word work or could Excel work or, can you do the odd PowerPoint, to there's only one company in the world that is keeping us going, and that's Microsoft, because without that, they were doing everything for us, right? They were actually our security profile, I think Mike mentioned that, but look, they're also routing all of our traffic. So everybody was routing everything through this Microsoft world. So they've become probably, more by luck than judgment, and the fact that they brought out their VDI infrastructure 3 or 4 months in Europe prior to this happening, right? All of a sudden they became the heartbeat of every organization, I suspect, around the world. Now you can add Zoom if you're doing Zoom or whatever, but the reality is that, and there's a bit of Google, I know some people on Google, but the reality is most organizations are now completely dependent on a very large tech company for their basic infrastructure. So we've now got to the point when you look at our future investment where we're no longer going to have a corporate network in the office. There's absolutely no need for it. So when you come in the office, you'll be given access to one thing called the internet, right? Because then it's exactly as if you're working at home. And the important thing about this is that we've had 11,000 people operating at home on an uncontended network in their home. When they come back to the office, they're on a contended network and a contended link. So we've already made the decision that we're not going to do that anymore. We're just going to open it all up, allow internet, VDI always on. Sorry, not VDI always on. A kind of VPN always on, right? So that completely changes the way you think about everything, how you architect your systems and the way it works. So we expect by early 2021, 3 or 4 months from now, to have unpicked our corporate network, whereas we have a whole series of corporate networks, and to say, guys, is there? Interestingly, our view of that is that starts to reduce our cyber risks, because we're no longer worried about actors coming into our building, plugging equipment in, because, hey, what do they get access to? The internet, right? They don't no longer get access to or see a network in the same way that they saw before. The simplification of that is quite huge. So that for us is kind of why we're moving some of our corporate systems away. Of course, they'll route back to the data center through one form or another, because we won't, in the realistic world, get everything off premise, right? Because for us, it's going to be the second half of next year before we start the migration of some of those changes, albeit outside of the collaboration. But for me, that's quite a radical shift. It's quite interesting thinking from some of our guys to come up with that and say, and we challenged ourselves, stop trying to, replicate an office environment. When the guy turns up, he does exactly the same in the office that he does at home. And I think that was the secret, Dave, and that's what we're striving for.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's amazing to me all the similarities, right, across what all of you are challenged with and tackling right now, and maybe slightly different variations, but largely trying to attack the same goals here. Which brings me really to my next question, because Steve, you were talking about the hybrid model, and there's been a lot of talk about that. That's probably the most overused word in our language these days. But I'm going to take a slightly different tack on that here for a second and say, speaking of hybrid environments, how is it going to impact your hiring strategy, and maybe specifically around the type of people that you may hire, how you might try to attract those people, and will it change where you look for people? Will you open up your world to look for people in different geographies, for example, or what will that look like? What's your view on that? Maybe Mike, if you don't mind, maybe you could kick that one off.
Sure. I mean, on the hybrid model is definitely something that we've been working through, but I think the events of 2020, the pandemic, certainly Black Lives Matter, some of the social injustice activities going on just across the globe have really forced us to go out there and relook at our approach. So Ranjan mentioned work from anywhere. So the approach is, why not hire from anywhere? We certainly looked at a lot of the top schools and things like that. Traditionally, our practitioners, there is a pedigree of sorts that may be more stereotypical of how we've hired in the past, but we've opened that filter up big time. We've relooked at the way that we hire, both for our practitioners as well as our internal technology staff. We put a huge premium on the apprenticeship and the intern model that we have to grow and evolve. So there's certainly a look towards the Veterans Affinity Network about, do we look at military people? Do we look at experienced hires? Do we look at the traditional Black colleges in the United States? And then think about a follow the sun model, where you can have people that work as part of a virtual team in Singapore, in Sri Lanka, in Mexico, and the United States, that are all part of the same team, as opposed to having people extremely co-located. So for us, it's certainly something that we're working through. When it comes to our practitioners, we're in the people business, very similar to a couple of the folks that are on the call. So that face-to-face contact for us, longer term, we realize that's we're in the people business, and there is going to be that contact. But there's certain roles as we move forward that they could be virtualized from this point forward, and so we're working through that. So I think the other part is not only how you acquire talent, acquire talent, but it's the retaining of that talent. When you have those relationships in-house and you've developed people, the camaraderie, you've gone to happy hours together, you've gone to lunch together, what happens when you onboard a team member and he or she has never, pressed the flesh or, seen somebody eyeball to eyeball. That's a very different experience. And the mentoring, everything as far as, paying attention to their potential or their needs as it relates to well-being, what's going on in their lives. So all those things are things that we're factoring in as we move forward.
Well, first of all, well said, Mike. Certainly a lot of considerations in terms of just the social events and being able to do something about it and contribute to it. Being that Crestron was historically in the office business, and there were good reasons for it. We're into manufacturing, we're into hardware design. We are obviously many parts of our business have support, etc. So there are functions that we've had people be able to work remotely. Two interesting phenomena. First of all, we continued to hire people during the last 4 or 5 months. And the amazing thing I think we learned from this is we were able to onboard people. We were able to, we feel, perhaps make them productive enough. But I'm not certain just the human element of there are people that are already working for the company. They have interacted personally. They have worked together. They have a working style and a working understanding, small teams, and they go remote and they have this rapport and the way they work. When you bring a new member fully remote, perhaps never having met them, we're not quite sure how well that works, right? At least our view is we have to understand that there has to be a mechanism where that human interaction, that collaboration still needs to be facilitated. And I know many companies that are 100% remote organize these annual events or biannual events to ensure just that. So Crestron is still evolving its thinking in terms of, on a broad scale, how should we approach our hiring? And we haven't drawn any conclusions other than the fact that we need people, and we have at this moment the ability to hire people anywhere. We have a global presence. We have 30 plus offices around the world, and we're able to bring people on. But a second interesting phenomenon has happened, though, that we are attracting talent. Perhaps previously, for any number of reasons, it was local talent that was attracted to Crestron. And now in this environment, at least we are approached both by recruiters and candidates saying, what is your policy? Do you have flexibility? I am very interested in working for Crestron, but I can only come into the office if needed subsequently 2 days a week, 3 days a week. So we are attracting talent. We are obviously much more flexible today than by design, and our thinking is evolving. So talent attraction has changed, and we have brought on board people that aren't local. There are people in Arizona, there are people in Texas, and we'll figure out when we all get back into the office as to whether they need to move or otherwise. But we have brought on talent from all parts of the world.
Yeah, I think, not again, try not to repeat what's already been said, but definitely for us, we were already fairly distributed. Our entire sales and sales engineering teams were remote. Our marketing team is remote. We were trying to keep our support people close, or at least in pods, so to speak, so that they come up to speed faster, right? The thing that we've definitely noticed is, a help desk engineer, for example, usually within 30 days, we could get them, fairly well up to speed. It's taking twice as long now, just because they can't roll their chair over to their neighbor and pick up on, nuances a lot faster, right? It's a lot more difficult to do that. We've noticed hiring, though, we are getting the same questions that you guys are getting, right? Hey, what's the policy post-COVID is the most popular question we're getting is, do I need to be in an office? We've had a number of employees move out of the cities and to beach homes or mountain homes, or, hey, I've got one employee that's literally been on the road for the last, I think, 7 or 8 weeks, just trying different places around the country and working remote and staying at different, Airbnbs or whatever. And it'll be interesting to see, long term, what percentage of folks really want to come back to the office versus ones that prefer the flexibility. So we're flexible across the board, like I said, and we're, the business that we're in is providing our customers with access to their applications remotely. So we're kind of inherently designed to work remotely. So, I do hear from our sales team that, while what we sell is actually, very popular given the current pandemic, deals are taking longer to move because they can't go to that in-person meeting. They can't take the customer out for dinner. They can't go golfing with them. Where a lot of deals traditionally, come to closure. So, for what it's worth, I don't know that we'll change our hiring practice per se, but we definitely are getting more unique questions through the hiring process.
So if I take the IT function first and then the business function second. So the IT function, we're quite fortunate to have circa 300 people that operate out of a captive in India, out of 2 locations in India. Now India has been out 100%, actually can't go in the office at all since March. The likelihood of that changing is pretty zero, right, from now until, some time from now. I talk to them every week, and I would say still probably well into next year, that's not going to change, right? There's going to be no change. What that forced us to do was completely look at what agile development means in a context where everybody is working remotely. Now normally the world's quite used to working with a remote setup in India with a collaborative team that you have a front end and a back end. When everybody's remote, and many of them in India back to their villages, not actually, just in the town, they went back to their family in their villages, many, many miles away from their city, with infrastructure that was, less than ideal, right, to say the least. And what that forced us to do was revisit and kind of reinvent what agile development meant for us, completely change what that meant and put in a new set of processes. So what we actually saw was a kind of refocus first into, well, let's sort out our infrastructure. Let's put new versions of things in place. Let's not just collaborate and build new functionality. Let's work out how we do things differently. Then let's now start driving the functional change. Now we've worked out how to do it. Now we've inducted in the last 6 or 8 weeks around 50 people into our team in India. And we've had to actually put in place some form of social distanced office kind of induction, because it is quite impossible, as a couple of you mentioned, to actually understand how to do stuff, right? It's dead easy if you're just writing something in code in isolation. But when you've got to collaborate on a product, which is what we're doing, and a knowledge transfer of a product and the development of a product, you need to collaborate in some way or another. So we've kind of formed small bubbles where we've got social distancing bubbles of new recruits who are inducted into our new way of working. So for me, we've had to reinvent how we induct and kind of reinvent how we develop and add new ways. And I actually don't think that's going to change, because I think, okay, we might get lots of more people back in India, but I think everybody now is comfortable operating in this new world of IT and how we're going to collaborate in a very different way. And the big difference is, if we look at Teams pre-COVID, and Teams pre-COVID was a kind of IT thing that you put in place, right? It was a kind of, okay, you've got another toy, right? But it's a sort of IT thing. Now it's the workflow of the organization, right? And that's completely different. I actually don't think we would have ever got to the collaboration levels that we've got to today without something that changed the way that everybody had to work, right? It completely changed it. It went from this kind of IT kind of techie thing that kind of installed to something completely different. And now, everybody's on it every day of the week. I think we're probably at 2 million video minutes a month now, right? And we were probably 0 back in February, right? As opposed to a few IT people messing around with it. And if you look at a business perspective, I think that we do have to have a degree of office working in a sales environment that we operate in. You do need that team office environment. And I think most of our businesses around the world have come back to a very different, flexible set of policies that were in place previously. Previously, we had, probably very limited flexibility. US, I think, was slightly different in the US business, but typically around the world, it was a very rigid set of policies. Now, I think there's an expectation that 2 days per week working from home, even post-COVID, is now the reality for our sales organization. Once you achieve an attainment of skill set, that attainment of skill set is your basic process to do the job. So that shifted completely differently. And what we have to do now is, change and build upon the workflows that we put in Teams and similar products to ensure that now gets sticky and we don't lose productivity going forward.
Hey, Steve, maybe I'll just add one more thing on that one. You just kind of queued up we're using the term purposeful in terms of how people would work in the office. So I think as we move forward, do you say require people to come to the office because this is where you need to be? What is really the reason that you need to be in the office? And so making those types of decisions where you need to meet with a client, where you need to collaborate one-on-one, where you need to really brainstorm is there. So as we go forward, rather than having everyone in the office because it's habit, is being very purposeful in terms of requiring people to come in, and also providing the optionality where people aren't comfortable to allow them to continue to work in a virtual arena.
I think that's right, Mike, and I actually think that I personally would agree with that. What is the purpose that that you're fulfilling, right? One of the things that I've started doing, I have probably about 450, 500 IT people around the world, is starting doing Microsoft Live events myself, right? And choosing it at a time with a global organization is quite tough, but actually having that live event means that I do interview the CEO, right? 15, 20 minutes on a live, quite easy to do, right? Quite easy to have a little chat. And that's something most of these teams would only see periodically. Now they can do it every month. They can have a 15-minute fireside chat with the CEO, with me interviewing him in quotes, right? And the executives now can get much more visibility out to the workforce than they've ever done before, because the technology is commonplace, everybody uses it, they're all familiar with it. And I think that changes that communication level completely from, sending out an email, sending out a blog. You can just get live, right? And real conversations. And I think that's where we're going to completely shift our communication channel as well to, instead of people flying all around the world, let's just move to a live event, 200 people, get sensible conversations going.
We did something similar. I started doing, Steve, we have engineering teams in India, we have engineering teams in Texas, we have engineering teams in Europe and the tri-state area. And one of the things that I started doing is typically I and other my peers, some of the members of my team would periodically travel because they manage all of these large teams. And I was just talking to them earlier this week, and I said, if you're used to traveling and having that interaction, well, now is a better opportunity. You can actually do that more frequently. But the mindset is not there to hold those virtual events because the motion is I should be there in person, and when I'm not there, I'm not doing it. One of the things that was, my role is product management. One of the things that I've had resounding success with and a lot of positive feedback is just speaking to the whole company about a product roadmap. And we are doing that quarterly. We are elaborating on what our strategy is, what are we planning to do in the market, what does the roadmap look like, what does the outlook look like. Typically, you have those all-hand events, and they are 30 to 45 minutes, but I've been able to hold roadmap sessions, very, very well received. We are fortunately able to find some times that work for the whole company in the global locations. But that definitely is a huge opportunity, and more participation and more information sharing than perhaps ever before. So I fully agree with the sentiment you just expressed.
So I'd like to stick on the hybrid work environment here a little bit longer from an employee standpoint. So keeping employees motivated and engaged has been a challenge, right? In some respects, as you all have mentioned, you do have more visibility and some respects connectivity to people through these virtual events, but the rest of the time people can feel isolated and alone and by themselves. So how are you all managing that? And maybe a sub question to that would be, there's been an awful lot of writing and talk out there about burnout, right? That one of the downsides of working remotely is that the day never starts and ends. It's just one continuous cycle. So how are you managing that within your business to avoid employee burnout and maintain a company culture as well when people are in all of these different places? So Steve, maybe if you could start with that one.
Yeah. I mean, that's a tough question, to be fair, Dave. I mean, that because you've got to try and connect, and we have a kind of role in our organisation that we call the billable manager. So it's somebody that they themselves have to bill for placement fees for placing guys and girls into jobs, but also they manage a team of 6 or 8 people that would be doing the same. Probably in most parts of our world, 2 or 3 of that team, or 6 or 7, would be a trainee, would be an associate, right, who would be with us less than 3 or 4 months. And normally in an office environment, that's a tremendously difficult job to juggle all of the elements of that particular role. And what they've had to do is adjust dramatically to the point where, their working day is not only demanding for them as an individual, because they have to do it all remotely, but they have to then manage 6 or 7 people kind of remotely. So what we've tried to do is to remove the burden on those particular people. So for me, it's about taking that burden away. So we've invented some technology called the digital manager. And the technology is about, which we're in the process of rolling out around the world. And that technology is about giving that manager the real-time statistics of what's going on with that team that they're operating. So, as opposed to kind of trying to have check-ins and Zoom calls and Teams calls every 10 minutes and interrupting the working day and the workflow and the rhythm that everybody gets into, let's now work on data and information. And let's now work on that model. So, we actually think and we were creating this, as we headed into the pandemic, and really we just accelerated the rollout of this because it's become such an important tool for many of our countries around the world to free up that management problem where we had the biggest concern, and it was a two-way concern. The concern was burnout of the manager, right, who would, as you quite rightly say, Dave, be on a kind of 12 or 14-hour day by the time they, lassoed, the start and the end of the day. But also that drives into the team, the same sort of model. And so, for me, it's trying to work very closely with our operational colleagues and understand what bit of their role we now need to automate and allow them to engage in a different way. So when they have the conversations, it's all about an engagement. It's all about a well-being engagement conversation, as opposed to a particular performance conversation. So previously, what we found was the early days that it was all about performance. And now it's not all about performance. It's about touching. It's about those soft touch points that you had before, because the performance is the performance, and now it's very visible to everybody, very understood to everybody. And that's the change, I think, Dave, which we're trying to make, which is to change that, because we now know it's here for the long haul, right? We now know this is not a short haul problem. Just in the UK, we were getting back to about 70% occupancy till the Prime Minister decided that's not a great thing to do. So we're now back down at 20 and 30% occupancy. Most of that would be colleagues who can't work from home because of the environment that they're operating within, albeit it would be a shared environment, with multiple people or whatever. So we're going to strive as an organization to connect with people and then provide them with tools that enable the conversations to become manager conversations versus performance conversations, if that kind of makes sense to everybody.
I think you touched on key points there, Dave, David, in asking your question, which is both engagement and well-being. And right at the very end, Steve mentioned something very important, which is not everybody is fortunate enough to have an environment to be able to work from home. And it's not just about internet access, it's about having a space that you can actually operate out of, or even having basic infrastructure, a table and chair that you comfortably can sit. And so I, in person, and many of my peers are very, very concerned about, from that aspect, the well-being. So engagement, yes, everybody would love to engage in a manner, but people are putting more hours than ever before, because you get up, you have your cup of tea or coffee, and you just sit down. And so it's more of a human and personal interaction and guidance at every level to say, you have to be disciplined about the way you are separating your work from your day-to-day activities. If you don't have a comfortable environment, we are looking for ways to technologically enable them. Simple things like having the right webcam, having the right speakerphone or headsets that are comfortable. Those are some basic things that I know most companies are probably doing, but you have to be aware of and take an initiative to do that. Now, the engagement part is an interesting one, because if you think about how we hold meetings and how we collaborate in person, we are actually engaged because we are looking at each other and we're talking to each other. And generally, assuming the meeting's going well, you're not opening your laptop and having 10 other conversations. Well, guess what? You're on Microsoft Teams, your video is off, 15 other people are pinging you and distracting you. And before you know it, oh, I'm sorry, I missed that part, So what I do personally, and what I've been encouraging people, is a very simple thing. Just turn your video on. And it's not because we want to know what you're doing or are you engaged. I found myself, and wherever people can do so, just it's a level of discipline that brings it on. So turn on the video if you can while having a conversation, a very simple thing. Now, I know it may not work for everybody and probably doesn't. But engagement, that is very, very important. The well-being, we have over-rotated on being very concerned about that. And just selectively amongst teams, bring a level of discipline. When are you holding your meetings? One example I give to my own team is, my commute is about an hour from where I live. I started coming into the office because I was finding myself working even longer and longer hours, and there was literally no end to the day. And then the other thing that I found is I was even more tired working from home, when theoretically it should be the opposite. I should be more comfortable, more relaxed, but it's exactly the opposite. And it dawned on me, because just to go get a cup of coffee or tea, I have to walk 50 steps. That alone is a break. You are potentially losing all of that when working from home. So these are, I can't speak to any technology elements, and I know it's a CIO summit, so hoping for some technology answers. But these are very simple human elements and guidance that I'm giving my teams and my peers are giving their teams. Be very disciplined on how you approach your workday. Be very disciplined about some boundaries if you can establish those. Utilize video as much as possible for engagement, and then do take breaks wherever possible. So those are some very basic approaches that we have taken as a company.
Yeah, I mean, Ranjan, kind of similar things at this end. I think the one area there, I mean, two things that you said, and I know that Steve did as well, is that well-being and boundaries. That's key. Also acknowledging, which I think we all try to be tough and present the, I can do anything, I'm a Superman, Superwoman. These are stressful times, and we need to acknowledge that. So I think part of it is to really understand that, where people are coming from. Not everyone has the same circumstances at home, as you mentioned. Some people, their coworkers aren't just their animals, but they happen to be the children that they're homeschooling. They could be taking care of loved ones and things like that that are particularly tough. So we've made a number of accommodations for people to work from home, stand-up desk in some cases, giving them, for our IT folks, dual monitors, providing them with Jabras and things like that. Creating a space, that's been one of the things, helping out with dependent care, giving some allowances there. But there's another item too, that something that maybe we can challenge ourselves is, people have PTO, and you haven't been able to take your vacations to the the exotic spots, but we've encouraged our folks to take the time off and really are pushing to make sure they are taking that. The other one that I've instituted, and it's been for several years, but I think it's taken hold since March, is we don't have 30-minute meetings for anyone that's as part of my team. It's a 20-minute meeting or it's a 50-minute meeting, and a meeting without an agenda is a chat. So do you want to chat for 20 minutes or do you want to have a meeting? If it's a meeting, then make sure you have the agenda, provide the outcomes, and once you've gotten to your point, get off the phone. That extra 10 minutes that we provide, or 5 minutes between meetings, that buffer allows people to get the cup of coffee, to actually catch up with email, and to get away from the tsunami that is work. So just a couple thoughts there.
Yeah, I think a lot of what you guys said we see as well. I would say there is one technology thing we encourage folks to look at. So as part of the Microsoft 365 suite, and you guys may get these emails as well if you're users, but they send you typically a weekly email from the My Analytics function of 365. And there's some pretty cool stuff in there. It'll actually tell you your work patterns, and they're focused around well-being, collaboration, managing your network, and uninterrupted time to focus. And if you delete those emails, which probably most of you do, maybe the next time you get one, take a look. There's some cool functionality in there, like auto scheduling time to focus based on your typical workday. It'll go block off time on your calendar to focus, and during that focus time, it'll shut off all your chat and email notifications, as an example. And so you might be surprised to see maybe not only your data, but any of your employee or team's data as well, and try to coach those folks on not burning the midnight oil, so to speak. Besides that, I think we've sort of taken some of the similar steps of making sure folks at home are comfortable, and that's everything from headsets to monitors to some folks have had furniture requests, chairs, desks. We try to be as accommodating as we can. Our parent company actually gave a $1,000 bonus to the overwhelming majority of the employees that work here to go spend it on furniture, or realistically anything they wanted. But it was encouraged to spruce up the home office, so to speak. But for sure, I'll log on at different hours of the day and night and just see who's on. And if there's no real reason for them to be on, I may send them a quick note saying, hey, shut it down for the day. Whatever you're working on is not, it could wait till tomorrow. So I think as a leader in IT or in general, you kind of have to keep an eye on the employees that are predisposed to put in, to not just shut off at the end of the day. And I totally understand where Ranjan's coming from on, when you drive to the office and you drive home, there's that clear shutdown and startup point that you don't really get. I'll take a call at 5 and think it's going to be 15 minutes, and an hour and a half later I'm still chatting with someone on something that probably could have waited till the next day.
While your chip child is tugging on your hands and legs.
Yeah, great. I know this is an evolving topic. I think we're all feeling our way through it, and the answers may be slightly different 3 or 6 months from now. The deeper we get into this and the longer people work from home, it may change over time as well. So, yeah, Duane, thanks for mentioning that Microsoft email every week. I dread seeing that each week when it pops up. Tells me I respond to emails too quickly. Tells me that one every week. So anyway, no, that's great feedback. So you all have mentioned how some of the technology is changing and the collaboration platforms are really at the center of almost the tech stack that you're using now. How will that change as you look forward, either the roles within your organization that will become more valuable or maybe new that didn't exist previously, or maybe it's skill sets that you'll need to develop or will be attractive to you and people that may not have been as important prior to 6 months ago? How will that change moving forward? Ranjan, maybe we could start with you.
Yeah, sure. So I'll offer a perspective from the business that Crestron is in, as opposed to specifically how it will impact Crestron, and I'll explain why. So Crestron is in the business of providing room and building technology, all of the automation that you can think of. The example I like to give is prior to arriving at Crestron, I've been dialing conference bridges for 20 plus years, finding the most effective workflow to be my mobile phone that could scan the calendar and put up the one touch to dial. Since I've come to Crestron, I've never dialed a conference bridge. Every room, every meeting, every desk was all Teams enabled. And we have an experience called BYOD where you can just plug your laptop. And if you need to use Zoom or Google Meet or anything else, it can take over all the technology in the room and bring it back to your laptop so your participants can see it. So when I think about that and what our customer base is doing, interestingly enough, they're investing more in technology than ever before because of some of the reasons we've discussed. They do anticipate a hybrid working environment, in spite of the announcements that, and I know many companies have the flexibility and can achieve so, they still envision that having a corporate building, having people in the office for the reasons that we mentioned, Mike very rightfully pointed out, purposeful, right? So you're going to come into the building and you'll have a need for technology. So the automation technology used to be the domain of boardrooms and training rooms, and all these kinds of experiences that we now have with Teams have been there for many, many years. Now we want to bring them into every space and every room. So what does that mean? The one area of investment that we are seeing is the convergence of the pro AV and the IT teams. It is becoming basically management of IT infrastructure to manage all of the room technology, all of the automation that takes place within the room, all of the collaboration experiences. So that's one big change that we are seeing, which is driving both the skill set and the hiring within firms to ensure that this is now managed at scale. It is not the domain of an executive office or a boardroom where there were dedicated staff to manage that technology. We need to manage this at scale. Many of our customers, Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies, are rolling out video conferencing at scale, 15,000 meeting rooms, right? So how do you manage that? And that's one big area of change, at least that I'm seeing from our customer base. Obviously, at Crestron, we have all of that technology rolled out. We have ways to manage it. The second aspect I'll mention is, I know your question is about what will change in terms of skill set, et cetera. I'm just expanding upon how IT organizations may be taking over more technology and room automation, and therefore hiring the right people, choosing to outsource, anything that gives scalable operations. That's really the focus, because there is going to be an explosion in technology in terms of video collaboration and collaboration technology. They have to find a way to manage it if they were not doing it previously.
I think one of the things that we've had to adapt pretty significantly how we do interviews. Before, pretty easy. Candidate shows up to the office, sit in a conference room, you rotate your folks through the interview, and you really get a feeling for the soft skills when you're in person, right? How do they communicate, eye contact, all that sort of stuff. Even over video, it's difficult to really get to know the person and make sure they're a good cultural fit and a good, team fit for whatever team they're going to be working on. And so, we added sort of to our interviewing process a homework assignment, right? And it varies from one team to the next. It might be building a PowerPoint deck if you're in marketing. It could be writing some code if you're on the software engineering team, and it might be writing a letter or something like that if you're in written communication and support. But effectively, we've given them homework and a very fixed time to do it as part of the interview to really try to hone in on, how are they going to be able to work remotely? How are their written and verbal communication skills? So that, from a hiring perspective, I think new roles, we definitely are relying a lot more on our project managers than we ever have been. And it's mainly because as you get into these larger group meetings with 30 and 40 people in them for bigger projects, just keeping track of who was there, who missed the last meeting, who needs to be at the next meeting, who's got which action items, and realistically, we're using a lot of the whiteboard features in Teams, and printing those off and saving them out in a file with meeting notes are just new ways of doing things and leveraging our project managers in different ways.
One area that I just remembered, wanted to mention, is with the rollout of this video collaboration technology, there are a lot of IoT endpoints effectively. These endpoints are Microsoft Teams rooms, all of the devices, the speakers, the microphones, these are all IoT technology, they're all connected to the internet. And this is something that Mike mentioned early on. This is a big security risk for companies, and they really have to think a lot more about what was previously perhaps video collaboration technology or Cisco WebEx room, etc., is now being rolled out across all of your meeting rooms, and you have thousands of endpoints effectively connected to the internet. The one area of investment I do see that I forgot to mention is just security focus around this. Obviously, every company invests a lot in security, but this is a whole another dimension being added with the proliferation of IoT endpoints that's taking place.
Yeah, I think those are, maybe I'll just hop on that one right away, is that, making sure that people are not only tech savvy, but they're cyber savvy as well. The phishing for our practitioners is one of the areas that we really come up. There's so many things when COVID-19, the links and things like that. So we've really spent a lot of time there. With our technology folks, we're trying to make sure that they think and act with the client and with the practitioner in mind. A lot of times you do technology for technology's sake, you may be buried in a data center, or you get your requirements, you kind of keep the network running. But what's the person on the other end? Who is that? What's going on? So, making sure we emphasize the speed, performance, reliability of our solutions. That's a key thing there. We're also making sure that our technology folks are, business savvy, that they have the global acumen and they have the domain understanding. So I'm responsible for audit and assurance, the products and solutions. So I have both the business side and the product and the technology side. So I want to make sure my technology staff can speak the language of the business. At the same time, we're making sure that all of our business folks are safe, trained, scaled agile framework, and then many of them are certified, so our product owners are able to do that. Leveraging, we use the Microsoft suite as well, so we use Azure DevOps as our definitive record for everything that we do, entering everything into Teams, and so that adds the operability. So we're raising the game for the business, raising the game for technology, and working as one team. Another couple things that we're doing is making people more comfortable in these type of forums. So doing a demo week. So we have all of our products and solutions that when you're working on your various application, you may be blindfolded to that particular application or that product, but opening up your aperture to understand what are the similarities, the integration points, and things like that. So making use of town halls, having people other than the leaders do the speaking, and really doing it, kind of dissecting things, creating a safe environment and a forum for people to do that.
Yeah, so sort of three things for me, really. One, if you kind of cast your mind back to the beginning of March, which is, seems like about 50 years ago to me, right? But it's not that long ago. We actually did things that would take 5 months, 10 months, 12 months in 5 days. Right? We completely changed and rewrote the rule book. And I think everybody here would have done exactly the same, that you'd have rewritten your rule book to say, we have no choice but to do something different. What that means is that the expectation has completely changed in what you can achieve, certainly at the executive level, certainly at the operational level in a business, because they think, well, you did it in March, you must be able to do it now. So the kind of shift of skill set to me is that balance between being very agile, being having appropriate risk control, because we probably, like most organizations, had some flexibility around that because there was a needs must issue without going too far. And then having the project management, and this was touched upon. So the cornerstone of it is what I'd call a new age project manager. So, this isn't a waterfall project manager. This isn't an agile project manager. This is a project manager that makes things happen at speed, right? But with an appropriate framework. So that to me is the kind of shift. We're seeing a dimensional shift in the type of people we need in that project management role, who are completely different than, running a spreadsheet or running a, Microsoft project plan and, sticking to the rigid view around all of that. This is now running at a very different level. So that change, I actually don't think we can row back from. The expectation has shifted, right? It is completely different now. The desire has shifted. And then the other skill set that I think we're seeing, which is no surprise at high demand, is the kind of cloud enablement, skill set. If it was moving in that direction in the world anyway, and it's not just moving in that direction, it is now past the point of no return. So, we're having to reskill parts of our workforce into that reskill world of cloud collaboration, DevOps, infrastructure as a service, because that's what we're now providing. So before we were providing a kind of infrastructure that people logged in at. Now I would argue that what we provide is infrastructure as a service. It just so happens it's got some applications coming out the back of it. None of that's going to happen at speed and scale unless you have that project management infrastructure in place with the types of skill set to make that happen in an appropriate risk framework. And yes, I agree with the point made around cyber. I actually think the cyber risk is shifted completely from within the walls of an organization. It's now shifted to a different endpoint, and I actually take your point on the different endpoint, and I think that's where we're certainly now assessing where do we think our threat will come from, and I think it's coming from different places than it ever did before, right?
Yeah. Well, I have a lot more questions. We have 20 minutes left, and I've got some questions from some of the participants in the discussion today, so I'd like to get to those, if that's okay. And the first question that maybe I'll ask of you first, Duane, is with everyone being remote, do you anticipate that companies will begin monitoring their employee systems and their own systems and screens more regularly, as either from a productivity standpoint or from a security standpoint? Do you see that changing?
Yeah, I mean, it's already happening, right? Again, because we're sort of in the business where we manage that for our customers, so we get a lot more inquiries now from, IT managers, directors, executives saying, hey, can you run a productivity report on this group over here? How many hours were they putting in? And so far, it really isn't uncovering anything negative, right? If nothing else, it's what we were talking about earlier, is people are working longer hours. And I think it's actually surprising a number of business owners out there that are really afraid about having their employees work remotely. And what it would do to productivity. Doesn't necessarily mean the 12 hours a day they're working is what the owners want them to work on, but it's definitely being monitored, and even to like the detail of when did they sign into which application, and were they signed in during this time, if there was an event or something like that, where the company wants to know what might have occurred. So it's a lot harder than it was before if you're not in IT, because you can't just walk down the hallway and see what's going on. But in all things IT, it's actually a lot easier, because you're not looking at badge readers anymore to see when somebody went into the office. You're looking at Active Directory to see when they signed into whatever application it is that they do their job in. So it's a lot faster to get the data, and the analytics is getting better and better every day.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I'm actually championing and seeing that we should measure different things. So I'm not sure that we're going to not measure things, because we as an organisation do measure things. But what I would argue, and I'm trying to champion this very strongly at the moment, to create a BI suite of a kind of different level of measures, is that we shouldn't no longer be measuring the ones that were there before. We should be measuring a new set of measures that are more pertinent to the environment that we now operate in, to the world that we're now living in, and to the world that we'll live in the future. And that's in some cases a tweak, but in some cases it's a radical shift away from a completely different set of measures. You can't now have a measure that says, in our perspective, how many candidates did you meet in the office this morning? Right, it's a kind of irrelevant measure. Right, if you measure that one, it's going to be a big fat zero, right, forever. Right, so we have to that's a very simple tongue-in-cheek measure, but there are many other these, and what I'm championing is a kind of new set of these that are completely different, that reflects the world that we're now living in, and that reflects the productivity of the individual. And I don't think it changes. It's not an intrusive thing. What it does is it reflects more of the outcome in the environment that the employee is now working in, that you anticipate that they should be doing. And I think if we can all kind of imagine that for our own business, that's actually what we should be doing. And trying to force fit old measures into this new world, I think, is asking for quite a lot of resentment at an employee level. I would argue probably a bit of distrust, right, that would start to flow through after a period of time. And I think in this environment, what you have to build is high levels of trust. So for me, trust is everything. And trust comes down to how you jointly agree, how you measure that, right? And I think there's no better person in our environment than the people at the front end that can talk to you and develop, and that's what I'm doing at the moment, what the new measure should be. But I think that key word of trust is important. If you have that trust as an organisation, you have a great culture. If you lose that trust, then I think that's a much more complex problem to solve longer term.
Yeah, well said, Steve. Trust is paramount. I would add another word, which is autonomy. So we generally build our teams to be able to operate autonomously at all levels, whether it was in the office or working from home. And so really the measurements are always, as you pointed out, about outcomes. In the world of Agile, instead of measuring velocity, measure how frequently you are releasing value to the customer base. How frequently are you releasing software? That's a better measurement than trying to measure the velocity of a particular team that may offer you different insights, etc. So we actually have very deliberately remained focused on making sure, as you point out, that we are measuring the right things, we are measuring outcomes, and we're focused on that. And we absolutely don't do things like measuring what people are doing, logging on, etc., or any of that, which would completely break the trust. And that would be very, very detrimental, obviously, with this remote working environment. You could lose a lot of productivity and functionality if that was to materialize.
Yeah, I'm not going to layer on there. David, I know that there's a number of other questions, so if you want to do that in the time that we have, maybe that might be, we can.
Sure. Yeah, I do have another question here. We've talked a lot about moving everything again to these collaboration platforms and how a company like Microsoft becomes the centerpiece of your system. Question from the audience is, how do you create a plan B for staff when there are major cloud outages like we experienced with Microsoft the other day?
Yeah, that's a toughie, and I get that a lot. I was actually, I spent a lot of time in our C-suite getting them convinced that we need to go to the cloud, and then we're all in on Microsoft, and what happens when Microsoft goes down? Do we go back to the dark ages and put everything back into an on-premise infrastructure? So that's tough. So, for us, we've really put on a huge emphasis on our business continuity plans. You test, previously we tested for chemical spills, for data center outages, for a pandemic maybe for one office, so where someone, but we never envisioned one where everyone would be working remotely, as I said before. Having a generic cloud strategy isn't really conducive for most businesses right there, because you put things in Amazon, you put things in Google, you put things in Microsoft. What you're doing is diluting your ability to deliver and make good on the profits that you have. So one of the things we've done is that provide a variety of productivity tools, and we've worked with Microsoft about alternate data centers. The other day, when Active Directory went down, which I probably shouldn't say anything about, that was the timing was probably as good as it could have been. We weren't in the midst of our busy season, but what it did is it really tightened up our focus. We didn't just wait for Microsoft. We got on the call, we worked with them, we managed expectations of our business. We provided, tell folks that this is a temporary outage, we're working it, but the confidence erodes over time. So I think right now is that last year lightning strikes, this year Active Directory, in March when everyone went to the cloud and Teams, and we were competing against schools for setting up provisioning on new team sites and things like that, and Microsoft wasn't able to get people into their data centers for obvious reasons. Those became challenges, but taking those lessons learned, applying those, I think if we have one or two more events like this, it's probably going to force us to go out there. Do we have an alternate strategy for some of our key, or what we refer to as our vital internal systems? So but right now, we're still fingers crossed, we're all in on our current cloud provider.
Yeah, I think I'll just maybe elaborate on that one real quick, and if we need to change topics, that's fine. We typically ask our customers to give us your top 3, apps or the things that you can't live without in a business. And most frequently these days, email is number 1, right? So we always recommend a solution on top of Office 365 that we call email continuity, right? So in the event that there's a Microsoft outage, there's a backup, portal they can go log into and get their mail, because it's delivered there first ultimately before it gets to Microsoft. And not to create a commercial for services here, but you kind of you got to really sit down as a business owner or an IT professional or a company and say, what can we live with? What can we live without? And whatever you can live without, you need to have a backup plan for it, regardless of what cloud provider it's in. There's solutions for just about anything out there. And certainly, much like everyone else, we were impacted by the Active Directory authentication issue the other night. And, the employees that remembered how to get to the back door were in and working fine. The ones that didn't, were asking everybody questions on how to do it. And, within probably 20 minutes, everybody was, up and running just as if they were normally. So it's just about planning and organizing your IT. And there, like I said, there's a way around pretty much any outage out there.
I know that's a tough one, because that's another one that I think is evolving over time. And to your point, Mike, if there are a couple more of those outages, then everyone's rethinking their strategy on that, or how they deal with the plan B. So the next question from the audience was around physical security. We've talked about this a little bit. I don't know if there's anything else you guys would like to highlight, but the question is, going forward, how does one deal with physical security in the work from anywhere approach? The same network, or I would even argue equipment that's protected by badges and fences and big dogs, that says in one place is protected differently in everyone's individual homes. So,
well, Dave, from my perspective, I actually think you have to assume, you have to assume that the equipment that they have will be stolen, right? I think from my perspective, we just assume that if we're giving them some equipment, a laptop, for instance, you have to make sure that the security controls embedded in that laptop assume that it does end up in the wrong person's hands. So you know, when we're designing our security, we just assume that that's going to be the case, right? So, you know, the physical device that they're given, we just assume that it will end up in a bad person's place, you know, whether that's down the local bar, right? Because he needs to sell it for some reason, right? Or whatever. But, you know, that's where it's going to end up. So from a physical point of view, that's the important thing for us, is whatever device you give them, whatever equipment that you give them, just assume, right? Just assume the worst. And that's what we're trying to do. So we're you know, we've kind of rapidly moved to that almost zero trust of that device, i.e. we're not going to trust, you know, that you can't break into it. So is it encrypted? Does it have BitLock on it? Right? Does it have the latest encryption stuff on it? You know, is all the software on it kept up to date? Do people understand their accountabilities and responsibilities of that equipment? So that for us is kind of where you get to with that question, I think. And interestingly, I've stopped worrying. This may be famous last words. I've stopped worrying less about our physical office, as I said earlier, with us moving to the internet being the only network, and I'm more worried about the individual device in the home location. That's the different shift for me. We were concerned about it before. Now it's heightened concern, because that's what's important: protecting that device.
Yeah, I think right there was where all of our devices, or everything we have, is behind what we refer to as a Deloitte managed device. So if someone takes the laptop, loses their phone, we're able to go through there and wipe it immediately. So through multi-factor authentication, through a variety of different techniques, securing everything at the device level is key. So we're expected to protect our clients' data, our firm's data, and our people's data, and we take that very seriously. So the physical aspect is, you know, they get through that first, second, third layer of defense. The device is something that we can control, and we're able to take care of that very quickly. So we're constantly testing it. We're also monitoring on the perimeter, you know, doing a number of things on the offensive and defensive side of the house with our cyber teams to make sure that we're good to go. Also educating our staff, you know, on what it is they need to do, going through different red team exercises to make sure that we're ready to go.
And maybe I'll just elaborate one more thing, because everything you guys said is definitely, you know, stuff we do as well. We've also there's somewhat of a new technology or new acronym called Secure Access, Secure Edge, and it's basically ultimately, you know, predestined to kill the VPN, right? So one of the things we've been experimenting with is putting SD-WAN appliances in our employees' homes. And it's we've taken it all the way to the step where we know that the work device behind there, we're okay inspecting the traffic, but we're segmenting off the home devices, the IoT devices, everything else that might be there, and anonymizing that data, mainly for privacy issues, right? We don't want the employee to feel like we can go spy on what they're watching on Netflix, for example. So we're very transparent about, okay, this is the configuration that you have. You know, you can look at it anytime you want, and we can provide you kind of a secure onboard to the cloud, right, and any other corporate applications. So something to think about.
Great, thank you. So I think we've got time for probably one more question around here. An hour and a half flies by, and this would maybe be a summation question. So as you each reflect back on the past 6 months, what's the most important thing that you learned maybe about yourself as a technology executive, as a leader of people, or about your teams that you'd like to share, and maybe how that could turn into a piece of advice for the people in this call, as everyone's encountering the same things that you guys have been going through as well?
I'll take a very quick response to that, which is my observation is that we were saying so many things that were impossible prior to the COVID, where I'll give you one example. In our company, we wanted to move. We have a training and an online training program for our customer base. We were saying, yeah, we want to have an online training, and it's going to take about 6 months to implement that. And this is to Steve's point. It took us all of 1 week to go from our in the building or, go to the customer site to do training to move to a fully online training modules. And it's been more successful than anything else we've done before. And it was all implemented in a week. So magically, that 6 month schedule somehow became a week. So my learning is that there must be an answer to very long schedules being presented by anybody to do something. There must be a different answer. And it's not just for me. I ask all of our teams to challenge ourselves to think, what would we do if we were in March or April and we had this need? And maybe the answer is it's not really needed. It's not that important. And that too is a choice to make. But if it is important, there has to be a way of accomplishing it.
My role has changed. I mean, I was 80% travel before across the globe on a regular basis, and I'm 100% virtual right now. So early days, long nights, short commute, no dry cleaning. My expenses are an all-time low. No one from our CFO or COO is asking me, what's going on here. But I've developed a lot more empathy and appreciation for people that do work from home, the people that homeschool, the people that have a variety of different challenges in their life. So it's also the pandemic has reinforced for me that how important our people are to Deloitte, because technologies come and go. All of us have been there and we've seen the evolution of technology, but what really makes a difference at the end of the day are the people. So when we focus on our people and our clients, I think right now is that we find that we're going to be more resilient. Things are going to change. Well, who knows what's going to get thrown at us in 2020? It's been a crazy year already, but you know what? We've really demonstrated our ability as a human race to be resilient, and it's taught me a lot about humility, and I'm now prepared for the long haul. So.
Yeah, definitely. I think it might sound simple, right? But prior to the pandemic, I felt like you kind of have this fixed business day, and if you asked an employee to join a 5:30 p.m. meeting or 3 a.m. meeting, you felt kind of bad, but you were trying to maximize the day. What I've learned about many of our employees is they actually prefer sometimes to hop on at 7 a.m. or 8 p.m. even, because they're working around their home life, their education of their kids, maybe taking care of another family member, and just ask, hey, what time works best for you? I'm available these hours. You might be available a different set of hours. Can we find one that overlaps? The time zone has just gone away from our perspective. It's more the family time is what you're trying to work around. So small piece of advice.
Yeah, so Dave, one last thing to finish. So I've actually been doing this IT stuff for 44 years, right? And I've been conditioned around three things, which is time, cost, quality, right? I'll tell you what, building on the point made earlier, time is no longer a dimension in what I'm looking at anymore, because back in March we proved that time is no longer the dimension, right? So I've had to reprogram myself to kind of ignore that dimension now and to start thinking about, okay, time, if time isn't the dimension, what is the dimension? And it's something completely different, right? Which is making sure we do it. And if you do it and you energize everybody to do it, it's unbelievable what human beings can achieve in a short space of time. Unbelievable. And I think all of us will have teams that have done that in a short space of time.
That's well said by all of you. I think resilience and adaptability and perseverance and the ability to get things done is a skill that we all have and sometimes gets buried, but in times of great need, they become prevalent and really show. And I think it really has, and you guys have certainly seen that in your organization. So thank you very much. I'd like to say that I really appreciate each of our panelists for your time today and for your informative and thought-provoking discussion. it was amazing. I could go on, and I think I've got a list of questions that we didn't get to, so maybe we'll do a round 2 at some point. So thank you very much. I'd like to thank all of our participants for taking part in today's call and for your thoughtful questions. And I hope that you all have found it as informative as I have, and will walk away with something that can help you in your business. So you'll see there on the screen the names of the people that put today's session together. These are some of our best and brightest. So if you're looking for help in either your career journey or for finding someone to be your next great hire in your organization, these are the people to talk to you. So thank you to you guys for putting together today's session. And finally, I'd note that our 2021 salary guide has just been released. So you can either scan it here on the QR code, or you can go to hayes.com and download a copy of it. You'll find a detailed analysis on the employment market, post-COVID hiring trends, salary information, and a whole lot more. So thank you again for everyone for your time today. Really appreciate it, and hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.